One of the groundskeepers at the Jacksonville Old City Cemetery was kind enough to show me the grave of Lieutenant William E. Gruber, the first Jacksonville detective to die in the line of duty. He was ambushed in April of 1897 under some of the most unusual and chilling circumstances I've ever heard. Involved was a group of spiritualists, possibly a cult. He was investigating the murders of several babies, according to the papers, although they seemed to be young women. And on top of all that, he was given death threats at the very seance on the Friday before he was killed in the woods near Springfield. Papers reported that Lieutenant Gruber was working on the George Gatto and Springfield baby murders, and the Gatto girl was actually named Marie Gatto. She was the daughter of a prominent Cuban family here in Jacksonville. Her father was the business owner of the largest cigar plant this side of the state and the biggest employer in the city, and she had some unusual connections. I believe that it's his investigation of this murder that got him killed. I don't know why local papers insist on including Marie Louise Gatto in a series of supposed baby murders, because in reality she was 18 or 19 years old at the time she was shot at the front gates of her father's mansion. Her father, a man named Gabriel Hidalgo Gatto, ran the El Modelo cigar factory out of Jacksonville. Before she passed away, she told police who responded to the killing that her ex-boyfriend, a man named Eddie Pitzer, was the one who killed her. But for some reason, none of the police seemed to believe this, especially Gruber, who began investigating. And you might understand why none of the police believed this if you take a look into the connections of her family and some of the things which happened next. Specifically, her mom's side of the family, because her father was a businessman, but her mom was connected to the Cuban military. Her mother, a woman named Henrietta, married Gabriel Hidalgo Gatto because he was a prominent businessman, but her mother's family was connected militarily. Specifically, her mother's brother, a man named Joseph, was the chief representative of the military junta in Cuba at the time in the city of Jacksonville. And on top of that, he also supported a number of filibustering expeditions attempting to seize the government by force and declare it a part of the United States. Meanwhile, her father was a doctor and seemed to be a very prominent physician in the city. So as she lay dying, she blamed this man, and cops just couldn't let go of the idea that there was a larger conspiracy at play. Chief among these was Lieutenant Gruber. So picture this: when Maria is killed at age 18 here in Jacksonville, even though she names her ex-boyfriend, every detective in town knows that her uncle, Joseph, is the representative of a military coup which happened in Cuba and had led a number of invasions of the island. Literally, people going to the island, killing soldiers and trying to take it for themselves, while Dr. Joseph H. Yuao, her mother's father, is a very prominent man with business connections all over the city. You can understand why cops didn't go with what she said. They figured that she was trying to cover up a larger conspiracy with public officials in Tampa, a conspiracy that Lieutenant Gruber may well have gotten caught up in. And this is where the story of Lieutenant Gruber gets truly strange. Papers after his death reported that he was an unusually intelligent man, but very factual. He didn't believe in anything paranormal, but on his route home from work, there was a man named Longshore who owned a shop, and every day he would step out and say, "Hey, Lieutenant Gruber, I've been doing seances, I'm into the spiritualism crowd, and there's a man named Dan Crowley who wants to speak with you." And naturally, Gruber is unnerved by this. He says, "You're speaking to ghosts and they want to talk to me?" Eventually, they loop him into attending a number of seances, and it seems like Lieutenant Gruber is immediately hooked and believes in the full validity of seances. So he begins to ask them about the supposed baby murders, because 3 of them had taken place in quick succession in the late 1890s in the city of Jacksonville. Although the groundskeeper tells me that this was the first Jacksonville police officer to lose his life in the line of duty, papers after the killing report that he was the second, both of whom were investigating the supposed baby murders. Now, the papers also reported that he'd been given death threats, but later they had to revise that statement to specify these threats came at a seance from beyond the veil. He was asking questions about where he could find clues to the murders, and the seance told him that he could find the murder weapon of the Gatto girl in the woods near Springfield if he searched near a specific crossroads out in the shrubs. But they warned him, "Someone is seeking to bash your skull in, so you better be careful and watch for the bushes." Days before he was killed, Lieutenant Gruber met with a personal friend and told him he was only days away from arresting the man who killed the Gatto girl. And then at 8:30 p.m. on April 28, 1897, he left the police station and walked to the woods near Springfield, which is where he was told he could find the revolver that killed the beautiful young Cuban girl. There, it seems like somebody stepped up behind him in the pitch blackness and caved his skull in with one swift blow. Initially, papers reported that this sounded like a gunshot, but they didn't find any exit wound, and it seemed to be a blunt object that had killed him. But the condition of his body was also unusual. It's unnerving to report that Lieutenant Gruber was found with his face half buried in the sand, a partially sucked lemon right next to him, and his hand supposedly bald and covering his mouth, a clear gesture to shut your lips if you were to speak about the murders. And although the police eventually brought in the man the dying woman accused of killing her, Eddie Peitzer, he was found not guilty and moved back up to Pittsburgh, a free man. Nobody in any of these murders was ever apprehended, and the case went cold, totally forgotten by modern-day Florida. And before we leave the city, I should point out that only 2 years after Marie was murdered, her father had his business burned down. The cigar factory left the city, and he himself was reported dead not long later, although I can't find much information about what happened.